people lie, people withhold truths, and you not only do become someone just seeking where you came from, seeking your identity, but you actually you're bundled with all the lies. They come out when you turn up. So it's not just an emotional rescue for you. You come with the baggage of the stories and the guilt or whatever, as an adopted person, you come with that.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today, from Australia, you're going to hear from Darryl. He admits he had a challenging childhood, from his relationship with his adoptive father to their family's need to move around a lot because they were so poor, and the eventual discovery that he's an adoptee. Darryl describes himself as a person for whom the truth is very important, so as an adult, he discharged his adoption, setting his personal record straight. This is Darryl's journey. Darryl grew up in a small family outside of Sydney, Australia, in a place called Hobby's Yards. It's a few hours west of Sydney and nearly 3 hours north of Canberra, the capital. In his words, it was a small, one-horse town that was pretty isolated. Hobby's Yards was so small there was only one phone line going into town. Anyone who picked up their phone could hear the conversations of other people on the same line, a party line. It was the kind of distance that seemed to perpetuate his parents' distant relationships with their own relatives. His father had developed asbestosis. He couldn't work in the city, so the family had left Sydney and moved to the country. Darryl grew up an only child without much extended family around at all, so there were only pictures of his distant family, but he couldn't see himself in those people. Describing other traits, Darryl said he didn't think like his father, and his dad was very handy around the house, while he was not.
But also the way he thought, he was an angry man. Like, his temper was pretty strong, and he'd go from 0 to 100 really quick. And I couldn't identify with that, logically. I thought, why get so angry about so many small things? And Mum, she was, pretty, blown by the wind, pretty insipid, didn't have much of a self-confidence, and I couldn't see myself in her either. And I didn't look like them, I didn't think like them, and I thought, well, and I had quite white skin, very white skin, and Dad and Mum would tan easily. They both had olive skin, and that didn't make sense either. So, I just didn't feel connected to them. I always felt weird when those pictures came out, or when relatives did, visit, or we visited them. I always didn't feel like I fitted in.
Did you generally get along with them, though? Like, you can get along with people, but just recognize that you have differences. How did you actually get along with them?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was fine. I was a happy kid. Up until about 10 years old, I think I was pretty happy. A pretty happy childhood. Then things changed one time. Dad, like I said, I mentioned he had a temper. This one day, we were in the city of Sydney this time. We had an outside toilet, down the backyard, like a loo out the back, and there was no toilet in the house. I was scared. It was dark, and I was scared to go out. I just wanted someone to stand by the rear door and just, you have imagination when you're a kid that, something's coming to jump out and get you. And Dad said, no, just go by yourself. And I asked Mum, would she? And he got mad and he hit me in the face and, broke my nose. And so from that point, there was a bit of a turning point between him and I. I was frightened of him after that. So, we got along up until that point. And then I was wary of him. Mum and I always, got along. She loved me, and it wasn't a problem. But like I say, Mum was trying to keep the peace between Dad and me as well. So, You know,
Yeah.
there was a bit of disruption in the family, if you like.
Darryl was sensing his differences between his parents and himself and couldn't identify any mirroring as he looked at their family photos. At about 13 years old, everything changed in their home.
You know, I was watching a TV show, and it was a Sunday matinee on a black and white TV, I think it was. And in the movie, little Johnny was adopted. And I'd seen, you know, it wasn't the first time I'd asked my parents whether I was adopted or not, because I didn't sort of think like them, didn't look like them. So, yeah, after the show, I went in and saw Mum, and I said, hey, I'm not adopted, am I? And she started crying and ran out. And Dad and Mum had a fight, and they normally don't fight, not between each other anyway. With me, they might have. And then it seemed like forever. It seemed like, because it was, you know, matinees, you know, lunchtime, and then it wasn't until the evening, it was dark, that Mum came back with a piece of paper in her hand and gave it to me. She said, yeah, you are adopted, and this is who you are. So, you know, suddenly I had a piece of paper with a different name on it, and yeah, I hadn't thought about adoption before then. And then I thought pretty hard, very quickly, about what it meant to me.
Darryl said when his mom handed him that document, it was a tough time for his identity to be in question because, as a teenage boy, he was already facing maturity and naturally trying to find himself. She handed him his original birth certificate. It was marked not for official use, and it had his natural mother's name on it, no natural father's name, and the name Darryl was given at birth.
When I got handed the document, I kind of couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that, well, firstly, that I was someone else, and secondly, that these people had lied to me for all my childhood, all my life, you know. And so I was a bit angry at them. I was kind of shocked, really, shocked and angry, I guess. My immediate thoughts was, you know, I've got to get out of here. You know, it's that fight or flight type thing. And I thought, well, I just got to go. And I was at school. I was doing well at school. And I thought, well, what's my choice? You know, if I get out of here tonight, where do I go? How do I actually get to Sydney? Because I thought, well, I've got a couple of friends in Sydney. Maybe I could go there. So I was actually playing it out in my head, you know, what I would do. And then I thought, you know, don't be stupid. You know, get on with your life. You have to complete school. And so, you know, logic took over. And I thought, well, the only way for me to deal with what has just happened is for me to hate my birth parents for giving me away. And I just logically, really not emotionally, logically made that choice and went, okay, so I'll hate them and that'll be my way forward, which lasted a few years until my dad died when I was about 22, and then I started searching for, you know, where I came from.
What was it like for you to see your self represented as another person with a different name on that piece of paper?
It was shocking. And I mean, at the same time, there was an inner belief. Like I felt, it's kind of hard to describe. It's like an egg hatch inside you. It's like an awakening that says, oh yeah, I'm still me, but there are other parts of me that I have yet to discover. So yeah, even though I buried that deep down for many years, I can tell you that there was a change in me at that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's unavoidable, right? Something.
Yeah, well, it's new information, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's also an affirmation of something that you suspected and just nobody ever told you, and it was always there. And now they've finally been almost forced to come forward with the truth.
And I suppose that's one of the problems of adoption, right? Like, I've read a lot of case studies where people are never told, or they're told, you know, while their mum's on their deathbed, and you know, like, oh yes, by the way, you had a sister, you know, and then you look up the sister and she passed, you know, 2 years prior or something. I think it's wrong that adoptive parents can withhold things like that, because it cheats you out of your own existence, you know, out of your connection to what might have been, you know. And some connections obviously fail, you know, that it's set up to fail in a way. And that's what they want. The government, wants to close the book on one past and give you a new past.
Darryl gave me a little bit of history in Australia's adoption policies of the past. According to him, there were regulations in place that made it easy for coercive tactics to be used on natural mothers to convince them to give up their babies. Mothers weren't told of their rights. Women were strapped down as the baby was taken away, and some infants were promised to new families before they were born. Forced adoptions became commonplace, especially as it applied to Black and Aboriginal people. There was a policy of assimilation that attempted to eradicate kids that were referred to as half-caste, mixed white and Black or Aborigine. The kids were taken from their mothers and placed into white families or institutions following policy to breed the Black out of those people. Darryl told me the Australian government has officially apologized for what has been called the stolen generation. He said there was a white stolen generation too, a pervasive culture of transplanting children to other families. Focusing back on Darryl, I asked him what his teenage years were like with his confirmation of an alternative identity. He shared that between the two classic generalized personas of adoptees, compliant or disruptive, he was compliant. He buried the whole adoption thing deep down, focusing on school. Since his father was in poor health, he couldn't work, and the family remained poor without resources. Instead of plotting their own destiny, life was kinda happening to them as they reacted to issues as they arose. Year after year, the family moved from town to town, not leaving much room for Darryl to process his adoption. In 1989, when Darryl was 19 years old, the family moved back to Sydney, where he got a job in advertising. He then bought a house with his income.
But then after a couple of years, Dad died. So he died when I was 22. And then I was kind of finally free enough to, not bear the wrath of Dad by trying to look for my birth family. And so I started the process, but the laws were still quite clear that you couldn't do this. It was only after, I think, about 5 more years that the laws changed that allowed adoptees to actually find out some information of where they came from. So at about, I suppose I was about 27 when I finally could write away, and it took a year for information to come back. And I found out who my mother was eventually. And then I found you keep writing away for material all the time. It's like this paperwork you keep searching for. But I found out that she'd married this guy called Alan, and his name was spelled Allen, which is normally a surname over here, not a first name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my middle name on my original birth certificate was Allen, Allen. So I thought, I wonder if this guy's my father. And that's how I eventually, found him, was based on that hunch.
After receiving his non-identifying information, Darryl felt dissatisfied with what he'd found. The signal as to who his birth father was confirmed in the middle name he was given that matched the man on his birth certificate's name, but there wasn't enough info to identify his birth mother. However, it was clear from some signals on the information on the government's return correspondence to Darryl that they had identified her. Darryl decided to write in for identifying information. When his request was fulfilled, Darryl learned his birth mother's name was Beverly. One of Darryl's friends worked in a place where she had a lot of access to personal information, so she looked up Beverly. Darryl's friend found Beverly had been living in Brisbane. The friend shared her children's names and dates of birth, and Beverly's husband's name. There were no intermediaries to help Darryl along, so his girlfriend called Beverly's phone.
She rang up and her mother, Dorothy, was there, and she was an old lady, but she said, oh, no, Beverly died. So, and that was basically the end of the conversation. So then I found out my mother had died that way, and I thought, okay, well, now I've got this other guy's name, Alan. I had his number because I'd, done some detective work. And then, I rang him one day. It turned out my mum, Jean, that's my adoptive mum, called me and said, one of my dad's brother had died in Brisbane, and it sort of hurried me along because I had to go up there for the funeral anyway. So I thought, well, I'll call this guy Alan and maybe I'll meet him. So I called him and I said, "Oh, g'day, I'm Darryl," and I told him a bit of background, and I said, "Are you my father?" And he said, "I reckon I would be," and that's it. It turns out, like much later, like years and years later, progressively I found out more information, and we did a DNA test to confirm that he was my father. We know when DNA was invented, not now like on Ancestry. There was no web back then, and so we did it the hard way, and we found out all these hidden stories and lies and in the various families. It turned out that my mother, they thought, was raped by her cousin, not Alan. And Alan was the guy he married, her long-term boyfriend. And she married, she had me when she was 21. She married Alan at 23.
Oh.
But, you have to dig all this stuff over time. And that's the nastiness of it all. People lie, people withhold truths, and you not only do you become someone just seeking where you came from, seeking your identity, but you're actually you're bundled with all the lies. They come out when you turn up. So it's not just an emotional rescue for you. You come with the baggage of the stories and the guilt or whatever, as an adopted person, you come with that.
Yeah, it's
which I suppose people can't handle, right?
Yeah, I thought there's three things that I realize end up happening with an adoptee coming back in reunion. You, one, become sort of this private investigator, right? You're digging for facts to try to find more about yourself, which ultimately uncovers facts about other people, which brings about these lies, which is the second thing is you end up being this unintentional family historian because you're trying to track down all the branches of the tree in order to understand where you fit on that tree. And then finally, as you've said, there's this baggage that you bring about with your return, and you in some ways can end up being the bad guy or girl, right? When people have felt like they have buried this thing, they got away with it, nobody knows the secret or whatever their particular feeling is. When the adoptee comes back, if they're savvy enough, or tenacious or whatever the quality is, they're able to pick up these details, and it brings back a whole, probably several decades prior set of stories that someone thought they would never have to deal with again. So there's multiple things that happen when you end up, returning and trying to find something about yourself.
That's it. And with me, I had actually two full blood brothers. So
is that because you said your parents they married 2 years after your relinquishment, is that right?
Yeah.
Darryl's biological parents, Beverly and Alan, were dating since they were 16 years old when they met on a train. After completing his trade school studies in auto body work, Alan got an apprenticeship which took him several hours outside of Brisbane. Beverly visited Alan sometimes, and one time she came home pregnant.
Then while she was home, one of her relatives, her cousin, was staying with the family, and I think they went out to a drive-in movie or something, and she came home and she was in tears and no one knew why. And then later on, of course, a couple of months later, she was pregnant, and her mum found out and put two and two together and thought, okay, this guy Gary has raped Beverly, and I don't want this baby in the house. You're an unmarried mother, you can go. You can leave or you can give up the baby for adoption. So, she was compliant too, right? And she went to Salvation Army Hospital. They used to put you in the hospital before you, showed. And she was 21 at the time, and went to hospital and then had me, and then gave consent to me to be adopted 2 days after, which was not within the legal requirement. She also lied about the father. She said it was this guy Gary. But if you were a woman and you were raped and you had a child because of that rape, would you name the son after your boyfriend?
You're right.
Probably not, right?
You're right.
You probably wouldn't even name that son, I guess. But that's what she did. She named me after him, which is that connection I mentioned. And so I always thought that Alan was my father, and obviously DNA proved it true. But she lied and she said Gary was the father on all the paperwork. And this is stuff I only got 18 months ago. So she nursed me for 2 weeks, and then I was adopted to Jean and Eddie. And then, Alan came back from his tenure up in Mackay, and they got together again, and eventually they were married 2 years later. Now, at this period of time, I actually wasn't adopted. I was fostered. Because of what she said that Gary was the father, the government and a doctor declared that I wasn't fit for adoption because of the close parental relationship that she'd declared. So at that point, I was going to go, into an institution or be fostered. As it turned out, I was fostered with Jean and Eddie. So I wasn't adopted straight away.
Wow.
In the meantime, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just blown away because I realize what you're saying is the government deemed you to be basically an incestual child or
Correct.
a child
Yes.
produced out of incest, and therefore made the judgment that you were not adoptable, and sort of in this conveyor belt of where, children go in the adoption sort of, the arm pushed you off to the side and said, that guy goes over there. That's really fascinating.
That's it. Yeah. If you've seen little baby chickens in a factory when they're hatched and they go through that factory and the arm goes exactly through the factory. So this one's good, this one's bad. This is a male, this is a female. The females go to the hatchery, the males get killed. And for a lot of people that did have deficiencies, like they had a cleft palate or something, like that little thing on their lip, or any little birth defect, or those people ended up institutionalized, and they didn't get adopted, and they got lots of issues, and they were abused by the church,
Mm-hmm.
So there's a long history.
Darryl learned that 2 years after he was relinquished, Alan and Beverly got married, and 2 days later, their next son, Lawrence, was born, prematurely. Sadly, Lawrence died after only 1 hour of life, so Beverly had relinquished one son and suffered the loss of a second premature infant. Did Alan know that he was the father, your father, at the time that you were relinquished?
She didn't tell him. No.
So he
didn't
thought.
say a word to Alan.
So Alan thought that his first child died.
Yeah.
When in fact his first child truly was relinquished into adoption, unbeknownst to him.
Exactly. So It was only after Lawrence died that Beverly came clean to Alan and said, "Oh, by the way, that's not your first son, and I gave your first son away."
Did he told you this?
Yeah.
What did he say about it? Like, how did he feel at the time?
Well, it's funny because it came out in the case of the discharged adoption case that I needed him to make an affidavit, so he had to tell the story, the full story. So some of this I found out over time, and then some I found out when he did the affidavit. What did he feel? Recently, he told me he thought, well, he knew that I was adopted, that he couldn't get me back, and he was more concerned about her mental health after just losing a baby. So he was more concentrating on that. But he realised because I was adopted, he could never get me back, so he wouldn't pursue it. But as it turned out, I wasn't adopted. I was still fostered, and legally they could have got me back, but the government didn't tell them that. The government told Beverly that I was adopted straight away, because this is the kind of stuff the government do. They withhold the truth. And the law said that she had visitation rights. The law also said that he was accountable for my expenses whilst I was under foster care, either him or this guy Gary, and the government never pursued them for that. So they swept it under the blanket, and they, tried to just keep it all hidden. it wasn't that, until that I started talking to the government recently over what they've done, they started to go, oh yeah, wow, we should have done that. And when you've read the laws and see what rights I did have even as a child, and those rights were just completely dismissed. So it's hard pill to swallow,
I wondered what trying to swallow that pill was like. Darryl had said earlier that he chose to hate his biological parents when he learned he was adopted. He admitted it was a false hate and a coping mechanism. At 22, he had released the hate when he launched his search, turning that energy into being inquisitive about who the people were he was searching for. He admits, as he's learned more about his story, he's had evolving emotions and feelings towards his mother and the government. Darryl represented himself in a case against the government to have his adoption discharged, essentially revoked. He looked up multiple laws between when he was born, when he was fostered, and when he was adopted. He researched what each law meant and applied them to his case for adoption discharge. Darryl said you can apply for adoption discharge under several grounds: false declarations, mental health issues, and more. He built a case that he had an argument on every ground. Unfortunately, he's legally barred from sharing the details of his case because adoptee issues are heard in children's court, a closed court, and even though Darryl is an adult, his case is treated like a children's case when it comes to disclosures.
My mother, I did have negative feelings about, because I thought, well, why would you give me away? What's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. I never felt like a victim, though. I never felt like there was something wrong with me. In fact, when I saw the paperwork saying there was something wrong with me from the doctor, saying that I was product of incest, and then I, of course, knew I wasn't. I just got me, really angry at the government. So I used the anger or the injustice, I think it's probably a better word than anger.
Yeah.
I just felt like there was a lot of injustice around my story. And when I read the law, I thought, well, there's a lot of, I have a case for a discharge of adoption, because I wanted to be my true self. I wanted to have my original name. I didn't want to be my adoptive parents' child, not because I didn't like them, but because it wasn't the truth. So that pushed me. We had a good relationship over time. Alan and I met my two brothers who were born, before my mother died when she was 30. And then he remarried and they had a child, a daughter. So I had two full brothers and a half sister. I suppose, reuniting with them was another story for another time, I guess. But, that relationship has been good over the years. I mean, it's been distant because I'm in Sydney and they're in Brisbane. But, we still get along and we look alike and we talk alike. For once, I have someone that looks like me and thinks like me.
Wow.
But so I had that over time, and, I wanted to be part of that family because that's my family. In reality, it's a family that I should have had, but it didn't have. And not that I, regret my childhood. People say you can't have what you lost. I'm not trying to obtain what I lost. My childhood is my childhood. I'm trying to just be who I am, really.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. And people put layers of stuff on top of it. You're ungrateful. What's your mum Jean think? Aren't you hurting her? And, at one point you could sort of say, it's more important for me to do this with my life because it's the truth. I realised that if I didn't do this discharge, that I'd be buried with a surname that isn't my heritage. And that was profound to me. And then I went to do a will in the government trustee, and I said, I want such and such left to my father, Alan, and my brothers, blah, blah, blah. And the lawyer from the government said, oh, you can't say that. And I said, what? Can't say what? They said, you can't call them your brothers and your father because they're not. And I said, but they are, because here's my DNA certificate that proves that they're my siblings and such. And they said, yeah, but under law, you are no connection to them. So I started to think, well, okay, under law, I'll get this changed. And so I used the law against them and got back who I am.
Good for you.
So I can't tell you what the judge said, but all I can say is that I did get my discharge. He didn't make a decision on all the grounds. He just made a decision on one of the grounds. And unfortunately, that was the mental health part of it, because adoptees usually have grounds generally for mental health issues because they're affected by what happened to them. So I was able to build a case with a psychologist's report, and that was enough to get a discharge. So what that meant was that they reinstated my original birth certificate, and I could choose my name, and it's as if, the adoption didn't happen legally. It's as if that didn't happen. You have a choice, right? The government doesn't let you be two people. The government lets you be one person. So I had to choose my truth, which was my original, birth certificate. And obviously I didn't want to lose all my names. So I kept my full name as it was, and added my, the surname at the end of it, a true surname. So, yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Sort of amalgamated into a different person.
He admits he had to change his name all over the place, from credit cards and mortgages to other legal documents. Of course, anytime Darryl applied for a name change, people would ask, "Why are you changing your name?" Sometimes he felt he had to tell his very private story, which he didn't always want to do.
Because every time you tell a story, it's also a dent in your armor. You have to let go again and then have people challenge you and say, "Oh, I wish I was adopted. I didn't like my family." And, you don't say that to adoptees.
Right.
They give everything not to be adopted, right?
Right.
So anyway, you hear these stories over and over, you get a bit immune to them after a while.
The adoption discharge process isn't a widely known process, Darryl said. The results don't get published, and he's only read a few cases where the process had been completed. He feels the whole thing is kept hidden to prevent more people from stepping forward and upsetting the apple cart, as he put it. It's not a process that's available everywhere, and different countries and different parts of Australia have different processes, if they exist at all. Darryl mentioned a process in New South Wales for applying for an integrated birth certificate that acknowledges a person's adoptive family and their birth family on the same piece of paper. But he pointed out that hybrid birth certificate would not have worked for him because his birth certificate said Gary was his birth father, not Alan. Adoption laws are changing over time, all over the world, and we're all trying to figure out what legal processes are available to us wherever we live. I switched over to asking about Jean, Darryl's adoptive mother. I wondered how he explained the discharge of his adoption to her and how she received the news of what he was setting out to achieve.
Yeah, well, she knew that I was always one that believed in justice and, the truth. So she knew I had a passion for that. And she knew some of the background of the searching that I'd done, because I'd let her in on some of it, because I didn't want to hurt her, obviously, but I'd let her know some of it. And she's interested in, mysteries. From an arm's length point of view, she sort of found it interesting. And when I discovered I actually could do a discharge, could have grounds, I thought, wow, I can't tell her, I can't hurt her until I know for sure that I'm going to go ahead with this. Because I don't know whether I had a case. I had to do a lot of research myself into whether I thought I had a case. And so when I finally decided I was going ahead and had to get affidavits, and you can't not tell them. You legally have to tell everyone.
Right.
Everyone that's a party to the adoption, including my brothers and sister, and father, and his new wife Sue, and Jean, of course. Everyone that was a party and has some interest in the topic needs to be served notices, invited to court to have their say. So, yes, she had to read some of more of the affidavits that I wrote, and it would have been quite painful to her. Not that I wanted her to read that, but legally I had to share that. So
Wow.
how does she feel? I think our relationship has changed slightly. I think she's more distant to me lately, but she did support the adoption, the discharge process. She wrote her own affidavit, and it was very helpful. So I think one of the reasons why, no one challenged my discharge. There was no one saying, I don't believe we should go ahead with this. Even the government, they didn't support it and they didn't deny it. They just sort of sat on the fence. So the judge was able to, not even consider any defence, if you like, although the government did put up a fight on some of the legal points I raised. So how does she feel? I mean, obviously not happy, but I don't know whether she understands the complete ramifications that, I'm no longer her son legally. But I am in emotional spirit. I still go to see her. I still support her exactly the same way I used to. Nothing's changed. Mm-hmm. And plus, it's the truth anyway. I'm not fabricating something. Mm-hmm. It's my original identity. And, I feel like I'm a superhero. I've been masquerading in my false identity for some time, and now I'm able to, be me.
Yeah. I wonder, Darryl, have you questioned whether you would have wanted to discharge your adoption if you had grown up with the knowledge that you were an adoptee? Or have you thought about whether it was so jarring the way you found out at 13 that it set you on this course versus if you had grown up with this knowledge, been perhaps slightly more comfortable with it, owned your adoption, that perhaps, have you contemplated whether you would have gone to this extent if you had known from your earliest memory?
There's another question also along your lines that someone said to me, my best friend said to me, and it was more around, if I didn't get on with my adopted family, would I still want to be one of them?
With your biological family?
It's not like, so if when I reunited with them, if they shunned me or didn't want to know, didn't want to talk, would I still want to be, legally part of that family?
Good question also.
Same question, almost same question.
Yeah.
The fact is, to me, the truth matters. So if I always knew I was adopted, I don't think it would have affected me in that I would still want to be me, right? So I didn't do the discharge because, I was shocked of, hearing when I was going through puberty about the fact that I was adopted. It wasn't a revenge or anything like that. It was just to reconcile the books, if you like. The ledgers didn't add up. I was given the wrong identity, so I just want to correct that. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is stuff that people take for granted that aren't adoptees. You're born into a family, you're given a name, you have a heritage, you have an ancestry. When you die, your proper name's on your grave. When you have kids, they're your kids with your name. You have a lineage. I didn't have any of that. Mm-hmm. And I never married and never had kids. I think possibly because of my adoption, issues around my adoption and relinquishment. But that's another topic completely. Yeah. But nevertheless, I don't think it would have mattered. I think I would have always wanted to be me, my true self. Yeah, wow. That's just who I am,
Whew. Darryl, wow, what a story. Gosh, that's just...
long story. Sorry about that.
No, man, this is what I'm here for, is to listen to it in its entirety. I just find it so fascinating. It's not often that I hear someone speak of their adoption in the way that you have, in terms of wanting the truth via reconciliation, getting the books right. It makes sense. It makes total sense. I get it, that you would want the accurate portrayal of your identity as it applies to you in your life. I have not heard many people go through what it requires to actually re-identify themselves. And I think it's impressive that you went to that extent. And I'm glad you were able to get it done. There's probably a gang of people who actually do want to get it done and absolutely cannot, as you've said.
Yeah, I think there are those people. I think it takes a lot of fortitude to be able to be hauled over. You know, at one point of time, you know, to do the discharge, you have to be a private investigator. You have to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, you have to be you as a witness, right? And then carrying all that along is this undercurrent of emotion. I remember one time I went to a lawyer to get something, witnessed. And it was one of my affidavits, and it was like 30 pages long. And I had to make sure the guy signed every page, and in order to lodge it with the court. Anyway, so I'm here trying to do that. And as I'm in my logic head, you know, my mental head going, okay, well, I have to do this now. I've got a deadline, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then this undercurrent of emotion came through, and I could not stop shaking. My hands, I couldn't turn the pages because I was just shaking too much. And I thought, wow, Darryl, you haven't actually got this under control.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't got your emotion out of this. You know, it's useful to, you know, use logic and you know, the rage against the injustice to get something done. But almost as I had finished this one, you know, task, the emotion, you know, the wave of emotion just came in and overwhelmed me. And so it's not an easy ride, you know. Even if you give it to solicitors to handle for you, it's not going to be an easy ride
Mm-hmm.
to discharge your adoption.
Yeah.
But coming out the other end, you know, if I failed in the discharge, like if they didn't give it to me, I don't know what would have happened then. You know, I would have been very depressed.
Yeah.
The fact that I won, I still haven't sort of celebrated that. You know, I'm still digesting after about 6 months, you know, the fact that I went through that. You know, it's emotionally opened up a lot of areas for me to work on as well.
Yeah.
Things that I must have buried for a long time.
What an emotional roller coaster it's been. But, you know, I hope that you can find peace in the fact that you've accomplished this. It's a major deal. You did it yourself, no representation. It was your decision, and you saw it all the way through. A lot of people quit when it's, you know, these legal things are challenging. They're tough. They're long.
I know. I made mistakes.
Yeah.
So I had an opportunity to quit at one point, and I thought, no, well, I've gone this far. I'll just keep going.
Yeah, good for you, man. I really appreciate you taking time to share your story, Darryl. This is really amazing, and I'm grateful to you for opening up about, you know, how challenging it was to get through everything from your childhood all the way through to the discharge. And
thank you.
And I hope you're finding happiness going forward, man.
Yeah, I hope you know, this chat also helps other people too, because that's my goal. I want to, you know, open people's eyes and you know, let them know they're not alone in this, and that there are things you can do about it.
Absolutely. Good for you, Darryl. Take care, man. All the best. I appreciate you being here. Take care, all right?
Thanks, mate. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you then. Bye.
Hey, it's me. Darryl's was a fascinating journey through his experience as a late discovery adoptee to his unsettled relationship with his adoptive father. Hearing the true story of his biological family and Beverly and Alan's marriage sounded like it was validating for Darryl's confirmation that he wasn't relinquished because something was wrong with him. I've never heard of another adoptee discharging their adoption to set the record straight for who they really are. I'm sure there are many more out there, and I'm interested to hear more. So if you've done something similar, reach out if you're open to talking. What I learned from Darryl's story is how deep his conviction was for setting his personal record straight on the identity he should have had. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you'll find something in Darryl's journey that inspires you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, who am I, really? If you would like to share your adoption journey and your attempt to connect with your biological family, please visit whoamireallypodcast.com/share. You can follow the show at facebook.com/WAIReally or follow on Twitter @WAIReally. If the show is meaningful to you, You can support me with a contribution to keep it going on patreon.com/WAIReally. Please subscribe to Who Am I Really on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. It would mean so much to me if you took a moment to leave a 5-star rating there. Those ratings can help others to find the podcast too. And if you're interested, you can check out the story of my adoption journey, Who Am I Really? An Adoptee Memoir, on Amazon.com, on Kindle, or as an audiobook on Audible. I hope you'll add my story to your reading list.